Hey guys, Jeremy Gillespie here for Going for Broke Outdoors. In this clip, Jake Bush discusses his top 5 area approach and why he loves hunting thermal hubs. Check it out.
So the top 5, the process there is just all the boots on the ground I'm putting on every year. I like to go in and still reevaluate a lot of these spots on at least a every 2-year basis, just to try to get a lay of the land. You know, is there a new clear cut in here? Is there some deadfall that's changing the way the deer are using it? Is there a beetle kill? I even had one area that had a bad mudslide, and it totally changed the travel patterns in there. And it's something that you would just never think about. So like to reevaluate them, but my thought process with the top 5 is these areas are just going to continue to get fine-tuned over the years, where they're areas that I'm really trying to, the biggest factor for me at this point is finding areas that genetically have the highest potential. Because in Ohio, at least, like in my home state, this approach works very well. But I can find a 5-year-old deer in just about any of the public land around here. Like we have old deer on public land here, but that can change from an antler size perspective by as much as 20 or 25 inches. Like I have areas that the deer as a 4-year-old, like will be, they'll average out as a 4-year-old 150 to 160 inches. But I also have areas where as a 4-year-old, they're 130 inches average. You'll get an outlier, but so I really like to focus on the areas that the more, like it's almost like you find a big track, it's going to be a big buck. You know what I mean? It's easier for me to have that approach because I can use woodsmanship and everything else, knowing, hey, big deer just live here. I'm not worried about what this big deer is going to look like now. He's got a 4-finger track. Chances are he's going to be a big deer. And so the way that I've fine-tuned those throughout the years, a lot of trail cameras, running a lot of cameras, visual observations, a couple spots that I've killed, finding shed antlers. Finding shed antlers is a pretty big one. On an average year, last year was an outlier. On the average year down here, I find, let's say 30 was the low end, and I found up to about 60 since I've been down here. So I'm getting a pretty good idea what areas are holding good bucks. So as far as like, that's the first thing I look at, is I want to just make sure that the areas I'm spending time in genetically can produce the deer that I'm trying to chase. So once I get that figured out, I start looking into other things. I want systems where I have as many factors as possible coming together. I call it like stacking your factors. I want to stack as many things in this area as possible. So I really like areas that I can gain historical data from, but I can't gain historical data from every area based on shifting food sources. And I've heard some arguments against this, but my argument back to that is, if I have a system that's full of white oaks and the white oaks don't produce, the deer just aren't there the following year. They're not. I mean, I have cameras to prove it. I have visual observations to prove it. They shift to the next good food source in the hills, especially because somewhere there's going to be acorns. You're going to have a prevalent food source, whether it's local ag, acorns, whatever it may be. A big thing down here is baiting on private. So if you don't have any food on the public, chances are the deer are going to be hugged really close to those edges because they're going to be feeding from corn feeders. I've seen that a lot. So I'm trying to find areas that are going to hold deer year after year, but also the entire year as much as possible. So if I can, I'm a hub guy, but a hub is a huge terrain feature. It is an entire system. Like I just call the system that I'm targeting a hub. When I look at a system, I want a system with the most amount of bedding points, the most cover, the most bedding points for specific wind directions, and the most travel routes. Hubs are going to create that because they have that C effect with all those subridges going in different directions. So that just creates like this perfect storm. Could I go hunt a big ridge that has no topography change on it? Sure, I could, but it's not going to hold the same amount of deer, generally speaking, as a hub system, because you have more opportunity for everything they need. So when I look at these systems, I like to just key on those right away because it's just congregating deer. So I find hubs, and then I'm like, okay, do they have clear cuts nearby? Do they have different ages of clear cuts? Like let's say one in 2012, 14, 16, 18, 20, or there's some new ones. Are there clear cuts that aren't on the maps yet? Because that's a huge thing that I key in on. I blew that one up, but I'm looking for just as much diversity in the terrain and in the cover as possible. And so those clear cuts do a lot for me. So once I have a hub with clear cuts, I like to start focusing on food. And what I'm focusing on there is there nearby ag? Like, let's say even within, if the ag is within 1.5 miles up to 2 miles, I've seen deer travel that, easy in the summertime. I see them down in a bean field 2 miles away, and then I have that buck on camera 2 weeks later up in the hills on acorns. So as long as there's some ag fields within a couple miles, I feel like they're going to have a pretty consistent, thing going on in that area. So I want an area with white oaks. I want an area with red oaks, with chinkapins, with burrs, with chestnut oaks. I want just a ton of different acorns. That way, if we have a bad white year, well, there's still reds in that system. We're kind of seeing that this year. We still have pretty good burrs and pretty good chinkapins, but the whites are really sporadic so far. I've only got a couple trees that are holding good whites. So I'm looking for all that. And then the late season thing for me is either greenbrier or chestnut oaks. So if I can find like rocky ridge tops in the area that are, they have really good drainage and they're not holding a lot of water up top, the chestnut oaks are going to be in there. And that's my key and my tip to finding sheds is chestnut oaks. My brother and I got on a chestnut oak ridge, south facing slope 2 years ago, and we found 8 or 9 antlers within a couple 100 yards, all fresh. And so it just congregates the deer late season. So now what I just did is I've got my summer food, I've got my early season food, I've got my late season food, I've got my does in the area for the rut. I've got everything I need to hold deer there all year. So there's going to be a lot more sign. The travel routes are going to be easier to identify. The scrapes, if you're holding deer all year, you're probably going to have a community scrape in that hub system. Now, if it's a hub system that only gets used during the rut or like because it's got a couple white oaks in it every couple of years, maybe you don't have that community scrape. But if it's one that's being used that has all these factors, it's really easy to go in there and identify what's going on. And so I look for areas that set up like that. And then to take it a step further, I really like areas where they're bedded. Like I've got Kentucky coming up in 3 days, and this is fresh in my mind because this setup is identical. They're bedded on a north-facing slope. I do not want the deer to be bedded on a north-facing slope and have food on the same slope because they can leave their bed and go up. What I like is when it's like let's say a maple ridge on the north-facing slope, very little food. Let's say it's got beech and maple. Well, all on the, if they go down to the bottom and up on the adjacent ridge, there's a white oak flat over there, or there's red oaks, or they go down to the bottom, they run out the drainage, there's an ag field down there. So in Kentucky, I have that exact setup. I've got deer bedding on a north-facing slope. We've got a forecasted south wind. It's going to be hot out. It's going to be 95 degrees. Most people hate that. I have killed the majority of my big deer in over 80 degrees. My couple biggest deer have been over 90. My biggest deer ever was 96 degrees at 3 p.m. because of what I'm going to explain right now. They're bedded on a north-facing slope that's steep, so it's shaded. What you just did is all the other ridges are getting hit with sun except for that north-facing slope. So he's going to be bedded on that north-facing slope all day long. If it's steep enough, your thermals never really pull like they would on a sun-faced slope. So you can cheat the thermal play a lot. You can get under that deer with him bedded on that north-facing slope, and your thermals very rarely are they going to go straight up. They're going to be more prevailing wind, oriented. They're still going to climb a little, but they're not going to climb like they would on that south-facing slope. So you access in, bordering the south-facing slope, so that's taking your thermals. You circle in up against that north-facing slope. He's bedded above you. Now at night in the afternoon, the thermals start to dump down even harder out of all those systems. It's running out the creek bottom because you have a flowing creek. You're set up on the other side of the creek, so he has no chance of smelling you. And the first thing in that deer's mind is he wants water. So now he's coming off the north-facing slope to hit that creek and that running water before he goes to the white oak flat on the adjacent ridge, and I'm waiting for that deer. So when I say I hunt hubs, people find hubs and they go target them, but they're not looking at all of those factors. I might scout. I've scouted, man, I bet you I've scouted, hundreds upon hundreds of hubs, and I've only got a dozen in 4 states that set up like that have every factor that I need, on top of difficult to access. Well, we haven't even got into that yet, but if you can come up with that strategy, at least for me, early season, man, you're eliminating 75% of the ground immediately because of the heat, and you're underneath that deer and he wants water. You're just stacking those factors. So that's why these hubs are so deadly early season for me. So that's pretty much what I'm focusing on. And now, because I'm so focused on that early season kill and putting all those pieces together like that, what that does is it creates these very diverse systems that are full of good deer habitat. So it holds them all year round, like we talked about. And then I can target those deer in there in the rut. Like I killed my grind buck, coming right down off a ridge, off a sub ridge. He was going into the hub, and I was waiting on that sub ridge for him. But I killed a deer there, second day of season too. So it's the same system. It's just a different approach, different time of year. So when you find the right ones, they're good all the time. But yeah, that's pretty much my approach for fine tuning them, is trying to just stack all those factors, and then you add in the genetic side of it. So I'll scout some of those, and I'll think they're going to be really good. I'll run cameras in it. I'll have some big body deer and some big tracks in the area. And then this like gnarly 130-inch 8-point pops out. I'm like, okay, well, I'll run cameras there for a couple years and see if anything bigger gets produced. If not, I'm just going to, it's in the notebook. I know it exists, so maybe I'll check in on it eventually. But I'm going to spend more of my time in the areas where the better genetics are.
Hey guys, if you like that clip and you want to hear more, check out the full episode with Jake. Be sure to subscribe for more outdoor content.